I'm Mark Hogue, the chair of the Beverly Hills Bar Association's AI in the Law section, along with my co-chair Amanda Harris, and I'm the founder of HogueLaw.ai, where I serve as fractional GC to mostly AI-first SaaS companies and tech startups. And today I'm delighted to introduce our speaker once again, Stephen Smith. Stephen's the CEO of Intelligence by Intent, where he provides AI strategy advisory and training to law firms and to professional services organizations. He's delivered AI training and strategic guidance to over 1,000 organizations with a focus on practical adoption, governance, and measurable ROI rather than just theoretical overviews. Stephen brings over 25 years of executive leadership experience, including CFO and SVP RevOps roles at multiple organizations and strategy partner roles at IBM Global Services and TCG Advisors, developing growth strategies for Fortune 100 technology companies. Stephen holds an MBA from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania and writes the Intelligence by Intent newsletter at smithstephen.com. And that's Stephen with a PH. So thanks everyone for being here today. And Stephen, please take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. Look, I'm glad to be back here again. There have been a lot of announcements just in the last couple of weeks since I last presented to this group. So let me jump in because we are on a pretty short timeline today, and there's a lot of really interesting things to cover. So I'm not going to go into presentation mode because I'm going to bounce around between PowerPoint and Claude, which is the focus of the conversation today, and also Excel because I want to show you a couple things that are in there as well. But look, the last 25 days have been pretty disruptive from an AI perspective, right? And I'm going to really focus only on Claude right now, which is where the focus of the conversation is today. There have also been big announcements we're expecting, today or tomorrow from ChatGPT and from Google's Gemini that will also, add a bunch more of additional capabilities. But look, back on January 12th, Anthropic launched something called Cowork, which is agentic AI for knowledge workers. I'm going to talk about that today because it's related to what they announced on January 30th. But the big thing about what Cowork does is it allows you to actually use the power of Claude on the files on your computer and spin up agents and have it do activities autonomously for you. So you can actually give it an activity, it can work on one or multiple files, it will go off and do what you've asked it to do. And then on January 30th, Anthropic with Claude launched 11 open source plugins with one specifically focused on legal, right? And that caused a lot of impact in the markets, right? In fact, a couple of days later, as people really started to understand what these plugins could do and how simple and powerful they were, right? It wiped off almost $300 billion of market cap from legal tech stocks in a single session. And we'll talk about that as well. And then to cap this, on February 5th, they launched Opus 4.6, which is their smartest model. And with that, they updated these plugins for Excel and for PowerPoint, which lets you take the power of Claude in those models directly. And again, I'll show you, which really makes working in these tools far easier for a lot of people than it ever was before. And so just quickly, look, as I said, there was a big market meltdown, right? Thomson Reuters was down 16%. It was the biggest single day drop on record, right? RELX was down, LegalZoom was down. You can see what happened here. And it's not that it was impacting these stocks so much specifically, from what Anthropic did. It's that the market's starting to realize that these tools are going to fundamentally change the business models that these companies operate on. So, and it's far broader. You can see, Goldman Sachs, Software Basket went down, the Nasdaq was down, the S&P 500 was down. So a lot of things happened there. And so what was different about this set of announcements? Because these companies make announcements all the time, right? There's new models. Like I said, we're supposed to get ChatGPT 5.3 soon. Google actually launched Gemini 3 Deep Think today, which had a massive increase in capabilities. But there was something that was different about these announcements, right? So this was the very first time that a foundation model company, and those, when we refer to foundation model companies, we talk about Anthropic, which has Claude, OpenAI, which has ChatGPT, or Google, which has Gemini, right? It's the first time one of those companies packaged legal workflows directly into its platform, right? And that started disrupting the disruptors. So people are looking at Harvey and Legora and others that build on top of these models, and suddenly there is a new competitor there, right? And it opens up new ways for you as an end practitioner to use these tools. There's some vertical integration going on, right? They're bundling, its own model and its wrapper and workflows, again, and coming right to you. And it's now making them makers and builders, right? So they're actually expanding their playbook and it becomes a broader end-to-end solution compared to what they had before. And again, what it really does for you, especially if you're reasonably technically savvy, it opens up a lot of things that you just couldn't do before from a capability standpoint. I want to talk about this for 1 second, because I've talked a lot about Claude in the past. In fact, if you watched the last session, I did a lot of demos in Claude. They have really done a lot from a reasoning and a logic and a performance perspective. And we were running 4.5 a couple of weeks ago. So on February 5th, they launched Opus 4.6. And there was a couple of things that are really important. Not only was it a much, much smarter and better model in every way, there were two things here that were really, really important that I want to highlight. The first thing is the normal Claude model has a context window of about 200,000 tokens, right? So call it 150,000 words, give or take. They beta released in this version, and I can't get to it. You can't get to it. They only, did a subset release to some large enterprise customers, but it's going to have a 1,000,000 token context window, right? So that's 750,000 words. It's 5x the size of the last one. And why that's so important? Because look, Gemini has a 1,000,000 token context window today, right? But there's something called long content retrieval. So when you load these models up with tons of information, tons of attachments, tons of chats you're having back and forth, right? Ideally, you want them to have perfect recall. Well, they don't. Prior to this, the best Anthropic model had about 18.5% recall. So, it would, miss some of the things, right? This new Opus 4.6 model has 76% recall, which leads all the benchmarks, which means that, it will be able to perfectly remember 76% of the stuff without missing anything, right? Which is honestly, it's a giant leap forward. The last time I looked, I believe Gemini 3's model was at like 26%. So again, we'll see what they come out with today. But again, this was a very large leap forward. But from a writing perspective, a reasoning perspective, everything about Opus 4.6 was a huge leap from 4.5, and it really is leading across the benchmarks today. And so what Anthropic has focused on is Claude is trying to be where you work, right? Whether you're working on a Mac, whether you're working on a PC, they are trying to make all these tools accessible to you because they're really looking at your end-to-end workflow. And you'll see two things in here. So you'll see in here on this image, right, that there's a new add-in here for PowerPoint. So if you're using PowerPoint to create presentations, and obviously, look, I created a presentation here, right? There is now a open Claude up here, this little button. There's a workflow in here, right? I'm going to tell it to allow and continue. And it can now actually operate on the slides in my presentation. And I'll give you a simple example here since I happen to be here. I'm going to make something really simple. I'm going to just say, change this slide so the background is white and the text is white and the text is black. This is the simplest example that I could probably do on here, just on this particular one. But I will tell you, I can actually take any of these other slides and you can change formats. You can drop in a presentation outline. You can say, create slides for me. You can really do whatever you want to do. So you can see here, it's literally real time from just using simple English language, changing the slide, right? I could have it, resize slides and do things. I didn't want to have it do much more than that for this. But I actually, when I was building this presentation, I was actually having Claude work with me and edit some of the slides. When you see slides that look like this and like this, originally they look very, very different. And I actually had them create it in this common format so I could have a common look and theme throughout the presentation. But let me stop sharing this. The more interesting one, honestly, is Excel. And so if I go share Excel for a second, so I think, almost every attorney I have ever worked with works in Excel. And I have spent years and years in Excel. In fact, I've been using Excel since it came out, I think in 1999, and I've used every version of it. And so I'm really familiar with all these things, but I know a lot of people aren't as fluent as, how do I create charts? How do I sort tables? Can I create a pivot table? Things like that. So I did a couple of simple pre-built examples to show you this, but let's say you had a bunch of transactions here, right? Say credit card transactions. I've got credit card dates, I've got categories, I've got business names, I've got amounts, I've got the months of when they are. And I want to do some analysis or some insight, right? I can literally tell it something as simple as, hey, make a pivot table by month, by spend, by category. And you can see here, it goes through, it reads the document, it does the stuff. Again, I'm not going to build it live because I want to spend time in co-working on the examples. But what it created for me then was a pivot table, right? And this is an actual live pivot table in Excel, right? So it actually went through and it did what I said. It built it by the spend categories. Here were the categories, and here were the months of the spend, right? So for a lot of people that aren't familiar with pivot tables, they'd have to look up how to do it and things like that. Now, when you use Claude in Excel or Claude in PowerPoint, again, you can just speak in plain language and it will do what you want to do. Similarly, I said, hey, I want you to go take that pivot table now and make some charts. And I literally said, create a chart in a new tab based on the pivot table. And it went through and it created a data set. And this was actually the first chart it created over here. I'll sort of zoom in so you can see this, right? It was giving, I said, give me the two highest categories of spend. And it gave me food and hotels because it was excluding jewelry because jewelry is such a, it's such off the axis. But I said, hey, give me one that also has jewelry in there so I can sort of see how much bigger jewelry spend was compared to, food and housing or other things. So my intent isn't to train you on these things, but just to show you that these capabilities are in there. They're really part of the new end-to-end solution that they are working on. And it's really fantastic. So the thing I want to talk about today and the thing that made the announcement so interesting is this thing called Cowork. And so I think last time I presented, we talked about something called Claude Code, which gives you the power of the Claude models in a terminal interface, right? And most people don't want to work in a terminal interface. So Claude built, as part of their Claude tools, a great interface that, again, lets you work on things on your computer, right? So you give it access to folders on your computer. It can read, it can edit, it can create files, it can combine files. It will plan and do multiple steps. You can give it a whole series of tasks, right? And it runs on an isolated virtual machine on your machine. So it's not going to step out and do other destructive things in areas that you don't tell it to do. It is incredibly powerful. I will show it to you in a minute. It really unlocks the power of these models to do really, really interesting use cases and do really interesting things. So what Anthropic announced a couple of days ago, back on January 30th, was these things called plugins, right? And a plugin is a skill. You can give a series of directions to to Anthropic, to Claude, and it will go follow those things, right? And what made them so unique is they launched 11 plugin categories. They launched legal, finance, sales, marketing, etc. But skills are just a set of English language directions. It's much like you would give a set of directions to an associate. You would say, do this, do this, do this, do this, and they can be very complex skills, right? And the other thing that's unique about them is they built in these things called connectors. So they actually give you an ability to connect to other services on your computer. So if there are third-party services, third-party vendor tools, third-party databases, if you use Box or Dropbox or Asana or other things, you can actually connect these skills to that. So it actually becomes this really amazing, powerful workforce for you. They allowed you to build these slash commands, which I'll show you. So you can actually sort of have a preview of the command. So if there's a command you use frequently, you can go slash and it will go do something for you. And they just added this thing called subagents. So when they first launched Claude Cowork and Claude Code, like they did that, you would tell it to do something. It was sort of one agent. It would go off and it would do everything in sequence. They've now created this ability to spawn off subagents. So let's say you were trying to analyze, you had an entire directory of credit card statements and tax statements and bank statements and things like that. Instead of going through them one at a time, you could actually tell Claude, hey, I want you to go analyze these things, pull this data out, and I want you to actually go now and actually spin up a subagent for every one of these things to run these things in parallel and run them faster. So this is the last page before I kind of jump over back and forth between the PowerPoint and Claude Cowork. So what specifically did they launch for legal, right? So they launched these legal plugins. They launched a contract review. They launched an NDA triage, right? They launched compliance workflows, legal briefings, and then templated responses. And they built these slash commands to make it really easy to do. As I said, the thing that I want to highlight here is the way that they built these is you can actually customize these now to your environment, to your business. So if you have a set of rules around NDAs or contract review, or if you've got a pre-done set of guidelines, it can build on all those. So they've given you the framework and the template to truly customize it to your business. And they made it really, really easy to do so. So there are a couple of questions in the Q&A. Let me just look at these really quick. And I'll answer a couple of these and I'll come to some of these at the end. How is Cowork Skills better than a robust Claude project already set up in custom instructions? The simplest answer, the simplest difference is it can operate directly on multiple files on your computer. You don't have to preload them up, and it can actually operate on hundreds of different files. And it can actually, as I said, spawn up subagents to do lots and lots of things in parallel. So it's a very different use case for that one. So I took care of that one. Will it redline NDAs in Word? The answer is yes, it can absolutely do that. This is a great capability in here. So let me keep going. I'll come back to some more of these later, but I love seeing the questions. So the first one that they launched is called review contract, right? So you can actually have it go review a contract clause by clause, right? And they've built in sort of this traffic light, this green, yellow, red, right? So based on the clauses they built in, it will read the contract and say, okay, the green ones are perfectly acceptable, yellow ones need attention, and red ones are, a high risk deviation from what our norms are, right? So it will then output back to you in a Word document, right? Specific redline suggestions, risk explanations, track changes. And again, you can go customize these things, right? So the scenario they talked about is, hey, you got a 47-page vendor agreement. The business team wants it signed by Friday. Claude, based on your rules, can instantly flag the most important things that you have to work with and give you some suggested responses. Again, it's not trying to replace you. It's trying to, short circuit some of the things you can do. So I'm going to pop over to Claude for a second. I've pre-done these because I want to show you what these things can do. And just quickly, so if you're in the Claude app, and I'm really happy to say now that they just launched the Windows version of Cowork, I think 2 days ago. So originally they only launched this in the Mac, but now this is also a Windows thing as well. Normally you have chats over here. You can go have all of your chats, and you have projects and all the things that you do. You have Cowork here. And by the way, Cowork only runs in the specific Claude app. It doesn't run in the web browser, right? But it basically says, hey, I want to go work in a folder here, and you can pick a folder to go work on. I'm going to work on, let's say, the downloads folder. And then I've got these different legal commands here. Whoop, let me go back here. I'm going to work in legal, and I've got, brief, vendor check, I've got respond. And to start one, I can just literally say, hey, vendor check, right? I can start typing it out, and then I can upload a file, or I can say, refer to these files in the directory, do whatever I want to do, and go do this work for me. So the first one I had to do, and I pre-built these because I want you to see the output, because these take, 5-10 minutes to run. They're not short. So the first one I did was a legal triage one where I said, hey, there's an NDA in the folder, go analyze it, right? So it said it found several NDAs. Let me go grab the most recent one. And so I've got it. I'm going to go do the rules. And what it creates for you here is, I'm going to make this a little bit wider so you can see it, is it went through, and I know I'm going a little bit out of order with the slides on the presentation, but it went through here and created this NDA triage report, right? So it says, hey, classification red, there are significant issues. We need to do a full legal review on this document. So it created a summary here. I didn't happen to have any parties in this example one, but the things that I told it to look for, things like mutual obligations, right? It failed. This was not a unilateral NDA, right? There are some issues in the definition scope. It's overbroad, right? The term of 5 years was too long. So you can see here, it took a document that I uploaded and basically went through and created this entire thing. And then it goes through and it identifies all the issues here, gives me the risks, gives you suggested fixes. So it's a much faster version. And then I can actually open up this document in Microsoft Word with all these suggested changes and red lines and things like that. So again, it makes it a lot easier to go through and do what you're talking about. I think this was actually, this was the second one that I did. This was the NDA one. So again, you can pre-screen for volume. You can have it screen a whole bunch of NDAs at one time and do the analysis for you. So, again, the example is you get 30 NDAs in a week. Most are standard. Claude categorizes each one. It flags with specific things. Let me go back to reviewing contract for a second. Let me go back and find my Zoom link here. I seem to have lost the Zoom window. Hold on here. Let me go back. Actually, let me go back to the PowerPoint for one sec. What I was saying is, I was looking at the NDA one here, right? Your team gets 30 NDAs per week. This is what we just looked at. I'm going to go back and show you the actual example of the review contract, because that's another really good example. But again, it looks clause by clause against your configuration. Again, it will give me sort of green, yellow, red. So let me go back there. And this is always the challenge of bouncing around in these tools, is let me go back and find now, here we go, review contract. And again, that's why I did these. So I literally just said, hey, do legal review on contract. I was in Cowork and I just typed legal review. I said, it asked me some questions. What do I want to go look at? I answered the questions. But again, it found, hey, 4 things that are in red, limitations of liability, indemnification, IP ownership, scope change. And again, I'm going to show you the output of this. So it did a consulting proposal that was redlined. So someone asked earlier in the questions about redlining. So I'll pull this up. And while that's pulling up, let me just look at the other questions here. So you can see here, by the way, that it actually went through and redlined. And it's really good at doing this, especially if you work in Word docs, at doing this automatically, right? So it redlined this, it made the suggested changes and all the things that it thinks should happen, again, based on, my firm's guidelines. And the other doc that's in here is the contract review, the actual summary itself, what actually goes and identifies the different clauses and things like that, that shows, hey, here's where the issues are. So we'll let that go ahead and load. You can see here, overall risk, don't sign this document as written. So again, it's not meant to replace your judgment, but it's meant to really shorten the time to help you and be a really powerful assistant as you work on these documents, as you do all these different things, right? So here's all the findings, here's all the flags. And again, if you're dealing with very, very large contracts, and I do this all the time, right? This makes it really, really easy to go through, take a look at these things and figure it out. So let me pop back to the PowerPoint for 1 second here. I'm not going to do all these because there's a lot in here and I do want to get to Q&A. There is a vendor check one. I won't do this one because this one really is powerful if you actually have a vendor system connected into your infrastructure, or your client does, right? So if you're a large organization, or you're in corporate and you've got, a vendor tool, you can actually have it check, the current status of your agreement with all the vendor deliverables and where they are and things like that. It'll also look for things like renewals, auto renew triggers. It'll flag, any gaps you have in coverage, right? Maybe you don't have a DPA with that vendor. So again, it's a really, really powerful tool, and it makes it very easy to go through and do this stuff. Another one they added was called Brief, and it allows you to generate contextual briefings in 3 modes, right? So I do want to talk about these, and I did one of these as a really good example. So maybe you want to set up a daily morning brief, right, on any overnight contract requests, compliance questions. So you could actually point it at either email coming in, or a shared directory that you have, or some other mechanism, maybe a Slack, where these things come in. And you can say, hey, go do a morning brief for me every single morning and identify, what came in, what things I have to focus on, and break it down for me, right? Or you can create a briefing on a topic, right? In essence, it's sort of a deep research kind of category. I want to go focus on a particular legal question. And that's actually the example that I did that I'll pull up really quickly. Or you can perhaps do a brief on an incident. You had a data breach and people are working on it. What are you doing? And let's go make this thing happen. So I'll show you the briefing on the topic, because that's actually a really interesting way to use this here. Go back into Claude, go back up here into the projects, and I'll do the brief on AI disclosure. And this is actually something we were talking about before the call. I was talking with Mark around, AI disclosures and requirements for attorneys and things like that. So, as of when I ran this a couple of days ago, right, there's no single statewide rule mandating attorney AI disclosure and filings. But, I wanted to know, hey, what are some best practices? What are some things I should look at? The question is, do I have to disclose that I'm using AI, with my clients? And so I asked it just to go research that really simple question. And it came back with, when it looked at, the California, the rule, 10.430, the state bar ethics, Morgan Lewis, California Court of Appeals rules, things like that. And came back and prepared for me a very nicely formatted document that I can go through and read and analyze. So again, as you're preparing things, as you're thinking about things, or if you want to explain things to clients, this is a powerful use case for, for using these tools. And again, you can see, it actually creates it basically in a Word document format. You can see up here, I can open it up in Word. It will do that. So one of the great things about using Claude this way is it actually really is generating, Excel spreadsheets or PowerPoints or Word documents for you. Again, that's all part of these new updates. So we go back to the presentation for a second. I'm only going to bounce back, I think, maybe 1 or 2 more times. Respond. If you've got typical auto response for certain kinds of legal inquiries, right, you can actually have it, do, different kinds of responses for you. So you can generate template responses. For the common things you get, maybe you get, data subject access requests or litigation discovery holds, right? Vendor questions. So again, if you've got pre-created stuff, and again, this one's probably a more at, attorneys in corporations, you can actually have it really pre-draft things for you to make your life, a lot easier. So I know we have 5 minutes left. I want to get to some questions, and I've got just a few more slides here. One of the things I want to mention to you, and I mentioned this earlier, is every one of these skills is completely customizable, right? So the screenshots here, you'll see it in the presentation that you can download after this. But all of these rules, all of these skills, they're just simple English language, right? So it describes a workflow. It describes the steps that you want it to do. It describes, if there's no NDA playbook, to go do this. So every one of these things is literally a very, very simple set of descriptive text that you can go do, and you can change and tailor to your business. So when they're in Claude, when you're working in Claude, you can actually click on the plugins menu. You can click on the commands, what I did here, and you can see like say triage, and you can literally go edit these skills right directly in there. So as you get comfortable with, hey, I didn't like that step, I want this step, please go do this. It's actually quite easy to do as part of that process. So just a couple of other things really quickly before I wrap this up. Actually, let me go back into Claude. I'll show you one more thing because actually I'll show you that, and then I'll show you another use case that you can use these for, because again, it's really quite simple. So if I go down the bottom left here, I can say plugins, and I've got these legal plugins, and I can go look at these skills here, right? So if I go look at the NDA triage skill, these are the instructions, right? You're an NDA screening assistant for an in-house legal team, right? You rapidly evaluate incoming NDAs against standard criteria, classify them by risk level, and provide routing recommendations, right? So these are these tools, right? This is what it came with as the starting plugin point, right? Look for definitions of confidential information, look for obligations of receiving party, standard carve-outs, all these things. If I want to change this, it's as simple as literally going up here and clicking edit, and then going through, and if I change the text in here, it will then change this skill that every time I use it will actually now have my updated skill. So again, they made this super powerful. And again, I think that's one of the reasons that a lot of the stocks in those companies dropped initially, is they're really putting the power of using these tools, call it to the people in a very, very easy way. So I did one really simple example just to show you the difference between using this and using, say, a project, or using, ChatGPT or Claude generally. So I pointed at a directory and I said, hey, I have a tax return in here, right? It's a corporate tax return. Go extract out the financials and construct an income statement, right? Very simple prompt, but you can see here, it shows you its progress. It's going to list out step by step all the activities it's going to go do. And then it calls on these other skills. It says, hey, I need to understand how to process a PDF, because this was a PDF tax return. I need to understand how to call Excel. And these are things that are built into Claude now. So it went through, it processed the document, it said, all right, net revenue, gross profit, total other income. And then because I said create an income statement, it actually created an Excel spreadsheet for me that I can pop up actually, here in Claude. I can then open it up in Excel. But again, from a time saving perspective, like think how long it would take an analyst or a paralegal to go through a tax return, create a statement, do it. You could actually have it operate again on multiple files in a directory, things like that. So again, really, really powerful use cases that Anthropic just unlocked. So last couple of slides really quickly. They're trying to build the full stack that everything works together, right? They launched Opus 4.6. They launched Cowork. They built this legal plugin. By the way, they built in sales ones and finance ones and others, but they're now seamlessly integrating this into Excel and PowerPoint and Word, right? So they're making this really, really simple. They did put out a couple of caveats. Look, this is a research preview, right? It can make mistakes. And as I said in the last meeting, right, all outputs have to be reviewed by licensed attorneys, right? You're the one that has the bar association number. You're the one that has to stand in front of a judge if there was a mistake. So at the end of the day, these tools are absolutely amazing and getting better every day at creating this kind of content for you. But please, please, please make sure you go through and look at all the stuff that's out there. And I will say, bigger picture, this stuff is moving so fast. From when we last met in January, right? Big changes in the models, a lot of new capabilities, right? And the question isn't whether AI is going to change legal work, right? It's whether you'll be ready when it does, because it's already doing it. And again, just last bit about me, right? How do I help organizations besides doing these CLEs? I do executive workshops. I go in depth. I provide training. We go into the tools. If people want firm-wide training, or, if they need litigation support, because a lot of the advanced use cases are more difficult than people can do. So with that, I know I've got 10:29 on my clock. I want to look at a couple more of the questions here and just see what else is in here. How does the new Claude legal plugin compare to OpenCase in terms of accuracy on citations? I don't know how to answer that. I'm not familiar with OpenCase, so I don't know if Mark or someone else can come back to that one later, because I'm just not as familiar with it. Does it work with Excel Power Query? What about Access? No, right now it works with native Excel. It won't work with Power Query, although if you were really experimental and you wanted to use Claude Code, I'm pretty sure Claude Code could do that. It doesn't currently connect to Access, as far as I know. How did you get the Open Claude option at the top of your documents? You have to have the the Claude downloaded app, right? So I have a Mac. This is the downloaded version, and you have to have a Pro or a Mac subscription or an enterprise subscription to get it. If you're on the free one, they have not ruled it out to the free ones yet, but they have now ruled out Cowork to the Pro users as well. What prompts do I have to use to Claude to help me with a mail merge? Let me take that one offline. I'm happy to answer that one. So if someone can just flag that I can come back to that one because that's a little bit of a longer answer on this one. I'll hit a couple more. Are there any options to keep the information provided to the agent confidential such that legal use cases would comply with the new rules of California is considering for sharing client information with AI? So the answer is yes, yes, and yes. So this is a great conversation. It's very timely. There was a ruling actually 2 days ago in New York around these tools. So the ruling, at least in New York, was basically that if you're using the consumer grade versions of these tools, this information is not privileged. You have to be using the enterprise grade versions of these tools, either the teams or the business or the enterprise ones, or accessing these tools over the API. So it's not enough just to turn off training data, which by the way, you should absolutely do, because I know a lot of people will still use consumer ones. But if you need the confidentiality, you need to be using the enterprise tools, and that's where the current rulings that I'm seeing are heading if you want that level of protection. What is a pivot table and what are they used for? That's a great question. A pivot table basically lets you summarize analysis in Excel, right? It actually lets you take like a long sets of rows of data and then actually create different types of analysis of different rows and columns and subcolumns of data. It's just a really powerful analytic tool that lets you crunch through a lot of stuff. Are there any concerns about privacy and the sharing of confidential private information when using Cowork? Again, it's tied to your subscription. So if you're using an enterprise subscription, you are completely covered. And again, I encourage people to do that or use the Teams one. You can use the consumer grade ones and turn off training, but as a ruling just came out, that information will not be considered privileged. So again, this is evolving. It literally is changing day by day. So always turn off training. And again, I tell everybody, please use the enterprise class tools. Yes, you can limit the files and folders it has access to in your computer. Absolutely, you can restrict it and it will only work on those. It's really powerful and it's really great that way. Can it be used to maintain confidentiality without paying for enterprise? Honestly, the answer, as far as I'm concerned, the answer is no. You can have it not train in your data, but again, literally based on the ruling I just saw that came out 2 days ago. And again, that was a New York-based ruling, but I suspect California will adopt similar rules. You can't just use consumer grade tools. You need to pay for enterprise ones. And candidly, they're not that much more expensive. You can get ChatGPT enterprise grade ones for $50 a month. You can get Claude ones for $150 a month, and you can get Gemini ones for $15 a month. So they're not materially more expensive than using consumer grade ones. You just need to understand how to set them up and turn on the privacy. Can I talk about privilege concerns when using Claude? I think I've covered this. These companies are allowing you to get 0-day retention. You got to request them specifically. But given their commercial terms of service, the rulings I'm seeing is that these generally should be, covered by privilege. Again, check as they come out. They're changing every day. How do you access Cowork? Is there a charge? Yeah, you have to be a subscriber. You have to either be a Pro or Max or an enterprise subscriber to use it. All right, I'm going to do 3 more because I know we're running over here. I've used AI for legal research leads, but not yet Claude. How much does it cost? So like I said, to do sort of the minimum cost for Claude to use an enterprise one is $50 a month. You get 2 basically, commercial grade subscriptions. So I would encourage you to use that. Can you work with briefs? What about legal authority hallucinations? Yeah, you can upload briefs. Look, these things are getting better and better all the time at minimizing hallucinations. But again, and it can check citations. And there are ways to start plugging these tools into third-party sources and have it surf the web. That's beyond what we can cover here. But you should still be using, LexisNexis and case law and other things to get official legal authority and citations for this stuff. Use this as, reasoning and writing tools when you have the research done. What is the jury simulation function? Somebody saw that. I actually have built a set of skills that uses Claude agents and subagents to allow you to basically mimic a jury. So you can fire up a bunch of agents that actually allow you to say, hey, these are the jurors, here's the descriptions, here's their background, here's the education, here's everything we presented at trial, here's my set of arguments. I want you to now use the power of AI and have, Claude simulate, this number of jurors, have them analyze the all the things I've uploaded, all the arguments, and then have them come up with conclusions, have them debate with each other, and then have sort of a jury foreman come back with how they think they would rule. So it's a simulation I've built to help firms start to do that. I've done the same thing on the judges side. So it really is an interesting thing. You could put in a lot of information about judges and have it try again simulate how it thinks a judge and things will rule. So I'm going to pause there. I know I've been talking really fast. We went 5 minutes over. There's a couple other questions. If they can be captured, I will try and get them in an email because there's like 18 more. But again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this. I hope you found this valuable. I normally focus on all the tools, not just Claude, but because of the updates and what they launched, in the last couple of weeks, it was really worth doing a deep dive. Again, reach out if you have any questions, and thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Bye-bye.